The dust in New Mexico territory did not wait for permission. It settled on the clean, and it settled on the filthy, and it made no judgment. Lorna felt she understood the dust. It was the only thing that treated all things as equal. She was 19 years old, and she lived in a shack that leaned away from the prevailing wind, as if apologizing for its own existence. The homestead, if it could be called such, was a parched patch of land punctuated by a collapsing fence and a well that coughed up more mud than water. Its only notable feature was its proximity to the saloon, 100 yards down the trail, a proximity that ensured Lorna was never truly at peace. The thin, out-of-tune sound of a piano, the sharp crack of laughter, the sudden, ugly shout of a man losing at cards. These were the sounds that stitched her days together. She scrubbed her stepfather's shirt in a bucket of gray water, her knuckles raw and split. The lye soap stung, but she had stopped noticing the sting weeks ago. Marcus, her stepfather, had been a different man when her mother was alive. Or perhaps, Lorna thought, he had been the same man, just better hidden beneath her mother's gentle management. Since her mother's passing 3 years prior, the man who remained was a ghost haunting his own life, pouring whiskey into the hole her mother had left, and pouring his meager earnings onto the green felt tables of the saloon. Those earnings were long gone. Now, he poured debt. The debt had a name, Coyle Atwater. Atwater owned the saloon. He owned the bank, though it had no sign. He owned the largest ranch in the county, the CA brand, a hot iron scar on the landscape. And, by extension, he owned Marcus. The debt had started as a few dollars for drink, then a few more for cards, then a marker for seed he never planted, then a lien on the homestead he had already ruined. Lorna scrubbed harder, the fabric tearing slightly under her fingers. She stopped, her chest tight, another thing to mend. Everything around her was breaking, and she was the only one left with a needle and thread. She heard him before she saw him. Marcus stumbled through the doorway, not with the usual drunken slur, but with a sharp, panicked energy. He was sober enough to be terrified. "He's coming. Lorna, he's coming here." Lorna did not have to ask who. She stood, wiping her hands on her threadbare apron. The water dripped onto the packed dirt floor. "He wants the money. Marcus? Of course he wants the money." Marcus ran a trembling hand through his thinning, greasy hair. "But I told him I need more time. A good hand. Lorna, just one good hand, and I can clear it all." "You said that last month, and the month before." Her voice was flat, worn smooth as river stone. "There is no money. There is no good hand coming. Don't you say that." He shrieked, his fear turning to a familiar, petty rage. "You don't know. You just sit here, scrubbing, judging." A horse nickered outside, not the tired swayback Marcus owned, but a strong, well-fed animal. Both of them froze. The shadow fell across the doorway before the man stepped through it. Coyle Atwater did not look like a saloon owner. He was dressed in a clean, dark coat, his boots polished, his hat undented. He was not a big man, but he filled the small shack, sucking all the air and light from it. He held a small, leather-bound ledger in his hand. He did not look at Marcus. He looked at Lorna. His eyes assessed her. They moved from her tangled brown hair, down her worn dress, to her bare feet on the dirt floor. She felt the gaze like an insect crawling on her skin. She forced herself to stand still, to not cross her arms, to not show the shiver that ran up her spine. "Atwater," Marcus said, his voice a squeak. "I was just coming to see you. I got a line on some work." Atwater raised one finger, and Marcus fell silent. "The debt, Marcus," Atwater said. His voice was quiet, cultured, more terrifying than any shout. He opened the ledger. "As of this morning, you owe me $412, plus interest. The land is forfeit. The shack is forfeit. Everything." "Coyle, please," Marcus whispered, shrinking. "Give me one more week. That's all I ask. Time is money. Marcus, you have neither—" Atwater closed the ledger with a soft thump. "You have nothing left to wager." He paused, his gaze still fixed on Lorna. "Unless, perhaps, you have something valuable in exchange. The silence stretched. Lorna could hear a fly buzzing near the bucket. She could hear Marcus's shallow, desperate breathing. Marcus looked at Atwater. He looked at Lorna. He looked back at Atwater. A slow, dawning realization crept into Marcus's eyes, followed by the dark, oily relief of a man finding a solution, no matter how foul. "She's a good worker," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. 19, strong. She can cook, she can clean. My late wife, Martha, taught her proper. Lorna stopped breathing. The floor seemed to drop away from her feet. "Marcus?" she whispered. The word was a dry leaf. "Marcus?" "No." Atwater raised an eyebrow. He looked at Lorna again, this time with a different kind of assessment. Not as a man looks at a person, but as he looks at a horse he is considering buying. He stepped closer, and she flinched. He reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "She's not much to look at," Atwater said, his thumb rubbing roughly against her skin. "But the debt is large. She'll pretty up," Marcus said, scrambling. "A good dress, some food." "Marcus, please," Lorna begged, the ice in her veins finally breaking. Tears welled. "Don't do this. I'm your daughter." "Stepdaughter," Marcus corrected, his eyes hard, refusing to meet hers. He was already justifying the betrayal. "And you'll be a bride of debt. He'll take care of you, better than I ever could." Atwater smiled. It was a thin, dry smile that held no warmth. "A bride," he mused. "I suppose that settles the legalities. A man is responsible for his wife's debts. And in this case, she is the debt." He released her chin, wiping his thumb and forefinger on his coat. He turned to Marcus. "The debt is settled. $412. He turned back to Lorna. "Get your things, girl." I don't have any things," she whispered, the tears now tracking clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. "Even better," Atwater said. "Save space in the wagon. Let's go." He grabbed her by the upper arm, his grip a band of steel. She tried to pull back, tried to plant her bare feet on the floor, but it was useless. He was not a large man, but he was strong, and she was half-starved. "Marcus!" she cried out, one last desperate appeal. Marcus turned his back to her. He walked to the water bucket and stared into its gray depths. "It's for the best. Lorna, you're provided for." The last thing she saw of the shack was her stepfather's back, rigid and unforgiving. Then the bright, cruel sunlight of the New Mexico morning hit her, and Coyle Atwater lifted her onto his wagon as if she were a sack of grain. He did not help her. He tossed her. The journey was 4 hours long, every minute a new kind of agony. The wagon bed was hard, the wheels jarring on the rutted trail, the sun a hammer beating on her head. Atwater spoke not a single word to her. He drove the team with an easy, competent hand, humming a tune she did not recognize. She was nothing to him. She was baggage. She was cargo. She wept silently for the first hour, the tears drying instantly in the hot wind. Then the numbness returned, a cold, heavy blanket that settled over her heart. She was not a person. She was a thing. She was a debt, paid in full. The CA ranch was not a homestead. It was an operation. It sprawled across a low, dusty valley, a main house that looked more like a fortress, a massive barn, and a bunkhouse that seemed to fester near the creek. Dozens of men moved about, branding cattle, breaking horses, mending fences. They were hard, sun-scorched men, and they all stopped to watch as Atwater's wagon rolled in. A few whistles cut the air. A low, suggestive laugh. Atwater pulled the wagon to a halt in front of the main house. He tied off the reins and climbed down. He walked around to her side and looked up. "Well, get down." Her legs were stiff, her body aching. She swung her legs over the side and slid, landing hard on the packed earth. Her threadbare dress, the only one she owned, was covered in dust. Atwater grabbed her arm again. "This is the main house. You'll stay here. My housekeeper quit last week. Said I was too particular. You will be less particular." He dragged her toward the porch. Your duties are simple. You will cook what I want to eat. You will clean what I tell you to clean. And you will be available when I require you. She stumbled. Available. He stopped and turned, his face close to hers. Do not play coy. Girl, you are my bride. Are you not? Payment. You will submit. It is that. Or I send you back to Marcus, and I will take the land and leave him with nothing. And then, I will tell the sheriff you stole from me. You will hang. She knew he was not lying. There was no one to appeal to. The circle of hard-faced men watching them was proof of that. She was property. Yes, sir, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Good. He shoved her through the front door. The house was dark and smelled of stale whiskey, old leather, and male sweat. The kitchen is through there. My supper is at 6. Do not be late. He released her and walked into a side room, a study, and closed the door. She was left standing alone in the dim, unfamiliar hallway. Outside, in the bright, cruel sun of the yard, Elias watched the exchange. He was new, hired on just 2 weeks past. He was quiet, a man who preferred the company of horses to men. He had a long, faded scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pulling one corner of his mouth into a permanent, cynical twist. The other hands gave him a wide berth. He did his work, breaking the wild ones, the ones the other men were too scared or too lazy to handle, and he kept to himself. He had been cleaning a hoof when the wagon pulled in. He recognized Atwater, and he saw the girl. He saw her bare feet hit the ground. He saw the way she flinched when Atwater grabbed her. He saw the absolute, soul-deep brokenness in her posture. The other hands saw a woman. They saw trouble or they saw sport. Elias saw something else. He saw a mirror. He saw the bruise on her pride, a stain darker than the dirt on her cheek. He saw her quietness, not as a virtue, inborn, but as a defense, learned. He had seen that kind of quiet in a deer just before the wolf closes in. Who's the new mayor? One of the other hands, a man named Jessup, drawled. Elias said nothing. He picked up the hoof, inspecting it for stones. Heard Atwater won her in a game. Another man whispered. From that drunk, Marcus. Won her? Jessup laughed. He bought her. Settled a debt. She's his property now. Legal as a deed. Elias let the hoof drop gently. He stroked the horse's flank, his touch calm and steady, though his gut was tight. He had seen this before. Men who treated people like property. He had a scar to prove what happened the last time he had interfered. He needed this job. He was tired of running, tired of being broke. He just wanted to earn his stake and move on. He was invisible here, and he liked it that way. He looked back at the house. The girl was gone, swallowed by the darkness of Coyle Atwater's home. Elias turned back to the horse, his face impassive. It was not his business. He had learned the hard way that nothing ever was. The first few days were a blur of terror and work. Lorna learned the house, the vast, empty spaces that Coyle Atwater rattled around in. She learned to scrub floors on her hands and knees, to bake bread in the big, temperamental wood stove, to wash Atwater's clothes in the creek, her hands aching from the cold water and the harsh soap. He was verbally cruel. He mocked her efforts. The food was too hot or too cold. The floors were not clean enough. He called her Payment more often than he called her Lorna. Payment, my coffee is cold. Make it again. Payment, you call this a swept floor. I see dust in the corners. Payment, you seem to be forgetting your place. You are not a guest here. You are not my wife. You are collateral. The other hands ignored her. She was part of the house, like a chair or a table. She did not exist. But the real terror began when the sun went down. The house had 3 bedrooms. He made her take the small one off the kitchen, a cot in what was once a pantry. It had no lock. The first night, she barricaded it with a small stool. She heard him outside the door, heard him test the handle, heard his low, amused chuckle. A stool, Payment? Do you think that will stop me? He pushed the door. The stool scraped and fell over. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted, reeking of whiskey. She scrambled to the far corner of the cot, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I'm so tired." He watched her for a long moment. She could not see his face, but she could feel the weight of his stare. "Tired," he mused. "Good. A tired animal doesn't bolt." He stepped back, pulling the door almost closed. "Sleep. You have a long day tomorrow. But do not mistake this for kindness. I am savoring. I paid $400 for you. I intend to get my money's worth, one piece at a time." He left. She lay shaking on the cot, the sound of his retreating footsteps a drumbeat against her fear. The nights continued like that, a game of cat and mouse. He would come to her door. Sometimes he would open it and just stand there, watching her pretend to be asleep. Sometimes he would walk in, sit on the edge of her cot, his weight pinning the blanket to her legs. He would talk, his voice low, telling her about his day, his cattle, his power. "I own this valley, girl. Every man in it either works for me or fears me. There is nowhere you can run, no one who will help you. You are mine." She resisted with the only weapon she had, silence. She became stone. She became ice. She made herself as small and as cold as possible. He would touch her hair, and she would not flinch. He would trace a finger along her jaw, and she would not breathe. Her coldness angered him. It was a small, silent no, and it infuriated him. "You think you're better than me?" he'd hiss, his fingers tightening. "You're nothing. You're a beggar I bought." But he had not yet forced her. He was drawing it out, enjoying her fear, waiting for her to break. A week after her arrival, it happened in the barn. Atwater had sent her to fetch a new coil of rope. The barn was hot, stuffy, and smelled of hay and manure. It was a relief from the cold, dark house. She was searching in the tack room when Atwater appeared behind her. "Looking for this?" he asked. He held the rope. She reached for it. "Thank you, sir." He did not let go. Instead, he dropped the rope and grabbed her wrist. His grip was brutal. "Stop calling me sir. A wife does not call her husband sir." You said I was not your wife," she stammered, trying to pull away. "I say many things." He was not drunk. This was worse. This was cold, calculated rage. He had been in town, and she suspected he had been rebuffed by someone, or had lost at cards. He was here to collect a different kind of debt. "You have been resisting me. Payment," he said, his voice low and dangerous. He twisted her arm, pulling her close, "And I am tired of it." He grabbed her, his other hand tangling in her hair, and pinned her against the rough-hewn wall of the stall. The wood splinters bit into her back. "Please," she gasped, the terror finally breaking her silence. "Please, Coil, don't." "It's a little late for please." He forced her face toward his. "Let her go, boss." The voice was not loud. It was low, dry, and came from the shadows by the far stalls. Atwater froze. He released Lorna's hair, letting her slump slightly, but he did not release her wrist. He turned his head, his eyes blazing. Elias stepped out of the shadow. He was holding a curry comb in one hand, but his other hand was resting on a pitchfork that was stuck, tines down, in a bale of hay. He did not look at Atwater. He was looking at Lorna. "What did you say?" "Hand." Atwater sneered. "I said, let her go." Elias's voice was flat. He still had not raised it. He looked tired. "You want to keep this job?" "Elias?" Atwater's hand moved from Lorna's wrist to the pistol on his hip. "Or do you want to keep your nose out of what is mine?" Elias's gaze finally shifted to Atwater. He looked at the hand on the gun. He looked at Atwater's face. He looked at Lorna, who was watching him with wide, terrified, pleading eyes. He needed the job. He needed the stake. He needed to stay invisible. He had seen what happened to men who played the hero. They ended up in unmarked graves. Elias slowly took his hand off the pitchfork. He looked back down at the ground, his shoulders slumping slightly. Atwater laughed, a short, ugly bark. "I thought so. You're all mouth, scar face, just like the rest of them." Elias did not look up. He said nothing. Atwater, his power confirmed, gave Lorna a violent shove. She fell to her knees in the dirt and straw. "Get back to the house. Payment. We will finish this later. And you." He jabbed a finger at Elias. "Get back to work, or get off my land." Atwater straightened his coat and strode out of the barn, back into the sunlight. Lorna stayed on her knees for a long second, catching her breath, the adrenaline making her shake. She pushed her hair out of her face. She looked at Elias. He was still standing there, staring at the patch of dirt Atwater had occupied. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscle in his scarred cheek jumped. He looked defeated. He looked ashamed. Lorna pushed herself up, wincing as her arm throbbed where Atwater had grabbed her. She wanted to say something. She wanted to thank him for trying, or curse him for failing. She did neither. She gathered her skirts and fled the barn, running back to the dark, cold safety of the house. That night, she could not sleep. The house was silent. Atwater had ridden out again. Gone to the saloon. She knew he would return, drunk and angry. The later he had promised hung over her like a guillotine. She slipped out the kitchen door. The air was cool, the sky a riot of stars. The bunkhouse was dark, all the hands asleep, except for one. A thin sliver of orange light glowed from the edge of the bunkhouse window. She moved closer, staying in the shadows. She could see him through the warped, dirty glass. Elias was sitting on his cot, his back to the wall, fully dressed. He was staring at nothing, his hands clasped between his knees. He was not sleeping. He was waiting. She stepped out of the shadow, just enough so the starlight caught her. He saw the movement. His head snapped up, his hand instantly going to a knife on his belt. Then he saw it was her. They stared at each other through the glass. 10 feet of dirt and shadow separated them. She was too afraid to speak, too afraid to break the silence. She raised her hand, slowly, and pressed it over her heart. It was a small gesture, a thank you, you saw me, and I am still here. His face was mostly shadow, the scar a pale line in the darkness. He watched her, unmoving. She thought he would turn away. She thought he would ignore her, but he didn't. He held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. Then he gave one short, sharp nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not a promise. It was just an acknowledgement. He had seen her. He had seen the thanks. He said nothing. He turned his head and looked back at the wall, dismissing her. Lorna pulled her hand away. She backed into the shadows and fled to the house. The single, silent nod, a tiny, cold ember in the vast darkness of her life. The land around Coyle Atwater's ranch was a living thing, and it was spiteful. The days were a white-hot sheet of heat that pressed down on the valley, bleaching the sky and making the very air shimmer. Lorna, scrubbing the porch, would feel the sweat sting her eyes and the raw, unyielding wood bite into her knees. The wind was worse than the heat. It came in the afternoons, a howling dervish that picked up the sand and grit, blasting the house in a relentless assault. These were the dust storms. Lorna learned to dread the pale yellow haze that formed on the horizon. It meant an hour of frantic work, shuttering the windows, stuffing rags into the cracks under the doors. And still, the dust found its way in. It coated every surface. A fine, gritty powder that settled in the food, in her hair, and in her lungs. It was a constant reminder that there was no clean place here, no sanctuary. At night, the land changed its voice. The heat would break, and a sudden, profound chill would settle over the plains. The coyotes began their chorus, a series of sharp, lonely yips that escalated into a wild, mournful howling. They sounded like lost souls, and Lorna would lie on her cot, listening, her hands clenched into fists. She felt like one of them, trapped, isolated, and screaming into a dark that did not care. Her life was a rhythm of chores, fear, and silence. Coyle Atwater, after the incident in the barn, had become more refined in his cruelty. He had not come to her room again, not physically. He seemed to have enjoyed Elias's humiliation more than he desired her submission. He had won. He had proved his power. Now, He wielded that power at the supper table. He would watch her, his eyes cold and appraising, as she served his plate. "You are looking thin. Payment," he said one evening, cutting into a steak. "I expect my property to be well maintained. Eat more." "Yes, sir," she murmured, her eyes on the floor. "But not too much. I have no use for a fat wife." He smiled. "Or a fat settlement." The other hands at the table. He often had his foreman and a few senior men eat in the house, would chuckle, a low, nervous sound. They would not meet her eye. Elias was never at that table. He ate with the rest of the hands in the bunkhouse, or so she assumed. She saw him, of course. It was impossible not to. He was a fixed point in the chaos of the ranch yard. She would be hanging Atwater's shirts on the line, the wind whipping the wet, heavy fabric against her, and she would see him in the corral. He moved with a quiet, fluid grace, a man who understood horses better than he would ever understand people. He never seemed to fight the animals. He seemed to whisper to them, to wait them out, to earn their trust through a patience she could not comprehend. She watched him, and he, sometimes, watched her. Coyle noticed. Lorna was feeding the chickens, scattering the last of the cracked corn, when Atwater's voice cut across the yard. "Elias." Elias, who had been cinching a saddle, did not straighten. He finished the knot, checked it, and only then did he turn slowly. "Boss?" Atwater walked over to him, his boots kicking up dust. He stopped close, forcing Elias to look down at him. Atwater gestured with his chin toward Lorna, who had frozen by the chicken coop. "You find the scenery interesting, Hand?" Atwater's voice was soft, but it carried. Elias's scarred face gave nothing away. "Just doing my job, boss. Your job is the horses. Anything that ain't a horse, you keep your eyes off it." He stepped even closer, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Especially what is mine. She is mine. Bought and paid for. You understand?" Lorna's stomach turned to ice. She wanted to run, to disappear. Elias's gaze flickered to Lorna for a fraction of a second. She saw something in his eyes, not fear, but a deep, banked anger. He looked back at Atwater. "I understand." "Good." Atwater clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that was more a blow than a friendly touch. "See that you do?" Atwater turned and strode back to the house, his posture radiating satisfaction. He had marked his territory once again. Elias stood for a long moment, unmoving, before turning back to the horse. He did not look at Lorna again. The incident terrified her, but it also planted a seed of defiance. He had called her property. He had warned another man away from her as if she were a piece of land. The next day, she found a reason to go to the barn. The kitchen was suffocating. Atwater had ridden out, taking most of the hands with him to round up strays. The ranch was quiet, save for a few men mending tack, and Elias, who was working in the far corral. She walked into the barn, the smell of hay and leather a balm. She went to the stall of a gentle old mare, a mare Atwater used for his short trips to town. The horse nickered, nudging her hand. "Hello, girl," Lorna whispered, stroking the mare's soft nose. Here, at least, was a creature that offered warmth without demand. She spent an hour brushing the mare, her movements slow and rhythmic, the tension easing from her shoulders with every stroke. She was so lost in the simple, repetitive task that she did not hear him approach. "She likes you." His voice was so close it made her jump, her hand flying to her chest. Elias stood just outside the stall, his hat in his hands. He was not looking at her, but at the horse. "You've got a good hand for it. You're quiet." She's calm," Lorna said, her voice barely a whisper. She was acutely aware of Atwater's warning. "I shouldn't be here." "Atwater's 5 miles away, headed north," Elias said, his gaze still on the mare. "And you're just tending the horses. That's a chore, ain't it?" He was giving her an excuse. She nodded, her throat tight. He stepped closer, into the stall, but kept his distance. He pointed to the mare's front hoof. "She's favoring that leg. She's got a stone." He crouched, his movements economical. "Hold her steady." Lorna put a hand on the mare's neck. Elias lifted the hoof, cradling it in his lap. With a few deft movements of his knife, He pried a small, sharp pebble from the frog. "There," he said. He ran his thumb over the spot. "No blood. She'll be fine." He let the hoof down gently. He did not leave. He stayed crouched, looking at the straw on the floor. The silence between them was heavy, but not as heavy as the silence in the main house. "Why did you step in?" she asked, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "In the barn, the other day." He looked up, and his eyes, a pale, washed-out gray, met hers. The scar on his face seemed to tighten. "He was hurting you. You backed down." It was an accusation, but it came out small and hurt. "I know." His voice was rough. "I need the job." "Oh." She looked away, shame and disappointment hot in her cheeks. "Of course, it was just a job. And a dead man can't help anyone," he added, so quietly she almost missed it. She looked at him again. He was standing now, his face unreadable. I started coming to the stables when he's gone," she said, offering a confession. "The horses don't look at me like I'm dirt or like I'm a meal." A small, sad smile touched the good side of his mouth. "They're honest. They fear you, or they trust you. They don't lie." He gestured to a wild-eyed gelding in the next corral. A new one, still bearing the CA brand, raw and fresh. "That one. He'll kick you as soon as look at you, but he's telling you he'll do it. He ain't pretending to be your friend first." "How do you calm them?" she asked, genuinely curious. "The wild ones." "You don't? Not at first," he said. He leaned on the stall gate, his first truly relaxed movement. "You just stand with them. You let them get used to your presence. You let them see you're not there to hurt them. You wait. Let them come to you." He was not just talking about horses. They fell into a cautious routine. When Atwater was gone, she would find work to do in the stables. She would muck stalls, refill water troughs, anything to be near the simple, honest animals. And Elias would be there. He would work nearby, and he would talk. He taught her small things, how to tie a proper knot, how to read a horse's ears, pin back for anger, one ear cocked for listening. He showed her how to mix a bran mash for a sick colt, and how to bandage a hoof, wrapping the burlap tight and clean. And as he taught, they talked. Their words were as cautious as their movements, small offerings left in the space between them. She learned he was from back east, Ohio. He spoke of trees and green hills, things she had only ever imagined. He learned she was from Texas, but had come to New Mexico with Marcus after her mother died. One afternoon, a violent dust storm had blown in, forcing them both into the relative quiet of the tack room. The wind howled, rattling the door, but the small, dark space felt safe. They sat on 2 feed sacks, the air thick with the smell of leather and saddle soap. "Marcus," she said, her voice low, "he wasn't always like this. When my mother was alive, he was different." "Love does that," Elias said, tracing a pattern in the dust on his chaps. "Or the lack of it." "My mother was sick for a long time," Lorna said, the words coming easier in the dim light. "For 2 years, I used to read to her. It was the only thing that made her smile." She paused, lost in the memory. "She loved poetry. I read her everything. She had one book, just one, that her father had given her. It was bound in blue leather. I read it until the pages were soft as cloth." "What happened to it?" Elias asked, his voice gentle. "When she died, Marcus started drinking. The first thing he sold was her piano. He said it took up too much space. Then he sold her jewelry. Then the book. He sold it for whiskey." Her voice broke. "It was the last thing I had of her. After that, he sold the house. And then he sold me." She had not meant to say it. The words hung in the air, stark and ugly. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She waited for him to shift, to leave, to make her feel ashamed. He did not. She felt his hand, rough and calloused, touch her hair. It was not a caress. It was just a presence, a hand, resting lightly. I had a sister, he said, his voice a low rumble. Younger than me. Her name was Clara. She was like that book. All the good in our house. Lorna raised her head, her face stained with tears and dust. He was not looking at her. He was staring at the far wall, his eyes seeing a long way off. We had a neighbor, he said, his voice flat and hard. An older man, respected. He had money. He hurt her. The scar on his face seemed to pull tight, a roadmap of his pain. She was 15. She never spoke again, not a word. She just withered. Died 6 months later. The doctor said it was consumption. I knew what it was. What did you do? Lorna whispered. I took justice into my own hands. Elias said, the law wouldn't touch him. So I did. I waited for him by the river. I used my hands. The finality in his voice made her shiver. They caught me. I served 7 years back east. When I got out, my PA was dead. My home was gone. There was nothing, so I just wandered. Been wandering ever since. He took his hand from her hair. That's how I got this. He touched his scar. A prison guard. He didn't like my quiet. They sat in silence, the wind screaming outside. 2 broken people, hiding in a tack room. Their stories laid bare. You're not like him, Lorna said, her voice fierce. The man who hurt her, you are not like that. Sometimes. I wonder, Elias said. He stood up. The storm's passing. You should get back to the house. Their conversations changed after that. They were less cautious. They began to meet secretly, not just in the barn, but by the stream that ran behind the bunkhouse. It was a thin trickle of water, lined with cottonwoods, and it was the only green place on the ranch. They met at night, after the house was dark and Atwater was either asleep or in town. Lorna would slip out, her bare feet making no sound, and he would be waiting. They would talk for hours. They talked about the stars, about the lives they wished they had. He told her about the ocean, which he had seen once. She told him about her dream of opening a school, of teaching children to read, to love books the way her mother had. In the moonlight, his scar seemed to soften. He was just a man. One night, the air was warm, the moon so bright it bleached the stones in the creek bed. You should go, he said. Atwater will be back from town soon. I don't want to, she said. I hate that house. I hate him. Lorna. He said her name, and it felt like the first time she had ever truly heard it. She stepped closer to him. Why do you stay, Elias? You could leave. You could be free. And where would I go? He asked, his voice bitter. Another ranch, another boss. It's all the same. It's not, she insisted. You are a good man. You don't know that. I do. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face. Not the scar, but the good side. His skin was rough, weathered. He flinched, but did not pull away. His hand came up and covered hers, pressing her palm to his cheek. He closed his eyes, his breath shuddering. You don't know what you're doing, he whispered. Yes, I do, she said. She leaned in, her heart hammering, and kissed his cheek. He let out a sound, a low groan, and his other hand came up, tangling in her hair. He did not kiss her. He just held her, his forehead pressed to hers. This is a mistake. Lorna, he will kill us both. I don't care. I care, he said, his voice fierce. He pulled back, his hands framing her face. I care. Now, go back. Be safe. He released her. She stumbled back, the warmth of his touch still on her skin. She turned and ran, her heart a wild, frantic bird in her chest. She was 10 yards from the house when she saw the light. The front door was open. Coyle Atwater was standing on the porch, a cigar glowing in his hand. He had returned early. He had seen her. He had seen her running from the creek. Enjoying a moonlight stroll. Payment? He asked. His voice was calm, deceptively calm. Lorna froze. I couldn't sleep. I just went for air. Air. He took a long drag on the cigar. Lying does not suit you. Get inside. She walked up the steps, her body rigid with fear. She tried to move past him. He grabbed her arm. "I find you missing from your bed," he said, his voice a low growl. "I find you running from the creek, where the bunkhouse is, where he is." "No," she said, shaking her head. "It wasn't. I was alone." "You are a terrible liar." He shoved her inside, kicking the door shut. He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her into the sitting room. "Did you think I was blind? Did you think I didn't see him looking at you? Did you think I didn't see you looking back?" He threw her to the floor. "You are mine. You are my property. And my property does not get soiled by the help." He unbuckled his belt. "No, Coyle, please," she shrieked, scrambling backward. "I was just walking, I swear." "I will teach you what happens when you leave this house," he hissed. He raised the belt. The first blow cut across her back. A line of fire. She screamed. The second caught her on the shoulder as she tried to rise. He was not drunk. He was cold, sober, and methodical. He beat her. He beat her until she was sobbing, curled in a ball on the floor, the taste of blood and dust in her mouth. When he was finished, he stood over her, breathing heavily. He buckled his belt. "Now," he said, his voice ragged, "go to your room. And if you ever leave this house again without my permission, I will give you to the other hands, and I will make him watch." He nudged her with his boot. "Go!" She dragged herself, crawling at first, then stumbling, to her small pantry room. She fell onto the cot, her body a single, radiating mass of pain. She wept into the thin, lumpy mattress, a raw, silent, hopeless weeping. The next day, she could barely move. Every muscle screamed. She forced herself up. She had chores. If she did not do her chores, it would be worse. She was hanging laundry on the line. Her arms ached, and the bruises on her back and shoulders were a fiery agony. She kept her head down, her hair a curtain, hiding her face. Elias walked out of the bunkhouse. He stopped. He saw her. He saw the way she moved, stiff and slow. He saw the dark, ugly bruise that snaked from under her collar up her neck. He saw the split in her lip. He looked at her for a long, terrible moment. His face, usually so impassive, became a mask of stone. The scar stood out, white and stark. Lorna saw him looking. She turned away, ashamed. He did not go to the barn. He started walking toward the main house. "Elias," she whispered, her voice a croak. "No, don't." He didn't listen. He walked onto the porch and kicked the front door open with such violence that the wood slammed against the inside wall. Lorna heard Atwater's surprised shout, "What in the hell?" "Atwater." Elias's voice was a roar she did not recognize. She limped to the porch. She saw Elias march into the study. Atwater was behind his desk, rising. "You lay your hands on her again," Elias growled, his voice vibrating with a rage that was terrifying to behold. "You are fired, you son of a bitch," Atwater yelled, fumbling for the drawer where he kept his gun. "You're not firing me," Elias said. "I quit." He lunged across the desk. He grabbed Atwater by the shirt and hauled him over it. He hit him. It was not a fight. It was a reckoning. He hit him once, a solid, brutal punch that sent Atwater crashing into the wall. Atwater slid to the floor, stunned and bleeding. Elias stood over him, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. He was shaking. He looked at Atwater, stunned and bloody on the floor. He looked at his own, bruised knuckles. He looked out the doorway, at Lorna, who was standing on the porch, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a new, sharper terror. The rage drained out of him, replaced by a cold, sudden realization of what he had done. He straightened his shirt. He walked out of the study, past Atwater, and onto the porch. He did not look at Lorna. He could not. He walked past her, off the porch, and toward the bunkhouse to gather his things. Lorna watched him go. He was leaving. He, her only friend, her only protector, the only man who had ever looked at her like she was a person, had just signed her death warrant and was now walking away. She had felt hopeless before. She had felt beaten. But this was a new, bottomless despair. He was abandoning her. He was leaving her alone with the man he had just punched, the man who now had every reason to finish what he had started. She sank onto the porch steps, the rough fabric of the laundry basket digging into her legs. The pain from her back was nothing compared to the cold, hollow ache in her chest. She put her head in her hands and, for the first time since she had arrived, she broke down completely, her sobs loud and ragged in the hot, unforgiving morning air. She did not see Elias leave. She heard the sound of a single horse, ridden hard, heading south, and then silence. Lorna sat on the porch steps, the sobs having torn her throat raw, leaving her in a cold, hollowed-out void. She was not just property. She was now damaged property. Property that had caused its owner to be struck. The price for that would be higher than any $400. Coyle Atwater did not come out of the house. He stayed in his study, nursing his split lip and his shattered pride. He did not call for her. He did not demand supper. He did not summon her for a beating. The silence from his room was, in its own way, more terrifying than his rage. He was planning. He was letting her wait. The sun beat down. The other hands, who had all witnessed the explosive exit of Elias, gave the main house a wide berth. The ranch was unnervingly quiet. She forced herself to move, her body a single constellation of pain from the previous night's beating. She had to fetch the eggs. Chores were the only thing that kept her anchored, the only thing that proved she was still, in some way, alive. She walked to the chicken coop, her steps slow and stiff. She gathered the eggs, her hands trembling. On her way back, she passed the far fence line, the one that separated the yard from the open range, the one that led toward the South Canyon. Something was there, tucked against the base of a fence post, half hidden by a clump of sage. It was a canteen. Not an army canteen, but a small, dented tin one. Beside it was a small, flat tin of the kind that held salve. Her heart stopped. She looked around, her gaze frantic. The yard was empty. She quickly limped to the post, snatched the items, and hid them in the deep pockets of her apron. The canteen was heavy, full. She uncapped it. Water, clean, fresh water. Not the sulphurous water from Atwater's well. She opened the salve. It was a thick, dark green paste, smelling of pine and comfrey. A healer's salve. He hadn't left. He hadn't abandoned her. He had seen her pain, her stiffness, and he had left her medicine. He was out there, somewhere close, watching. A new, dangerous emotion flooded her chest, so potent it almost made her dizzy. Hope. It was a terrifying, blade-sharp feeling, a feeling she had forgotten how to trust. She hid the items under her cot, in the dark pantry, and for the first time since her arrival, the cold, suffocating presence of Coyle Atwater seemed, for just a moment, a little less powerful. Coyle emerged the next day. His lip was swollen and purple, his eye blackened. He was impeccably dressed, and his quiet, cold fury was palpable. He did not speak to Lorna. He did not look at her. He gave his orders to his foreman, his voice a low, clipped monotone. He was a snake, coiled and waiting. He was watching everyone, his eyes scanning the hands, looking for any sign of lingering loyalty to the man who had struck him. Lorna knew she had to wait. She used the salve on her bruises, the cool, tingling sensation a secret between her and the canyon. She drank the water in tiny, precious sips. She knew where he must be. There was an old line shack in the South Canyon, a relic from a previous owner, long since abandoned. It was a ruin, a place no one ever went. The arroyo there sometimes held water, which explained the fresh canteen. She waited 3 days, 3 agonizing days where Coyle's silent presence filled the house, where every creak of the floorboards was a threat. On the 4th day, he rode out, telling his foreman he was going to town, to the bank. He took 2 men with him. Lorna watched them disappear over the ridge. She waited another hour, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Then she stole a heel of bread, a small wedge of cheese, and slipped out the back. She ran. She did not walk. She ran, her aching muscles protesting, her breath tearing at her lungs. She followed the fence line, her bare feet kicking up dust. The canyon was 2 miles away, a winding cut in the earth, hidden from the ranch. The shack was barely standing, its roof half gone, its door a single plank hanging from one leather hinge. It looked empty, dead. "Elias," she whispered, her voice a dry croak. The silence was absolute. Fear pricked her. Had she been wrong? Had he left them and moved on? "Elias," she called, louder this time. A shadow moved inside. He was on her in an instant, his hand clamping over her mouth, his other arm a band of steel around her waist, dragging her inside and out of the light. "Are you insane?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. He was angry, not just angry, but terrified. "Does he know? Did he follow you?" She shook her head, her eyes wide, his hand still clamped over her mouth. He smelled of dust, sweat, and the pine salve. He stared at her, his wild eyes scanning her face, and then he seemed to truly see her, the fading bruise on her cheek, the split in her lip, the exhaustion. His hand, the one over her mouth, gentled. His fingers, rough and calloused, brushed her cheek. He let her go. "You shouldn't be here, Lorna. It's too dangerous." The moment he released her, the strength that had carried her across the 2 miles evaporated. Her legs gave out. The terror of the beating, the fear of his abandonment, the raw, aching hope of the last 3 days, it all crashed down on her. She sank to the dirt floor and wept, not the silent sobs of the ranch house, but the great, shuddering, tearing sobs of a soul breaking apart. I thought you'd left me," she choked out, her hands fisted in her skirt. He beat me. And you." "You were gone. I was alone." Elias stood over her, his own face a mask of anguish. "I didn't leave," he said, his voice rough. "I couldn't. I had to let him think I was gone. I had to wait." He knelt in front of her. "Lorna." She looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears. "He will kill me, Elias, or he will do what he promised." "No," he said. It was not a plea. It was a vow. She didn't know how it happened. She was weeping, and he was there. And then she was clinging to him. Her hands were in his hair, pulling his face to hers, her body desperate for a human connection that was not a threat, not a violation. She kissed him. It was a kiss of raw, animal desperation. It was a thank you. It was a plea. It was all the words she could not say. It tasted of salt, dust, and blood. For a second, he was rigid, his body tense, and then, with a low groan that seemed to be torn from his very soul, he kissed her back, his arms wrapped around her, crushing her to him. This was not the tender, hesitant touch by the stream. This was a storm. This was a breaking. His mouth was as desperate as hers, a starving man's kiss. All the rage he felt for Coyle, all the shame of his past, all the loneliness of his wandering years, it poured into that kiss. He pulled her up, his hands tangled in her dress, her hands fisted in his shirt. They fell back against a pile of old, dry hay in the corner, a cascade of limbs and sensation. This was not thought. This was not planned. It was a fire, set by Coyle's cruelty and fanned by their own desperation. It was raw, and it was necessary, and it was theirs. The sun fell, and the moon rose, its pale, silver light filtering through the broken slats of the roof. They lay tangled in the hay, their bodies slick with sweat, the dust of the shack clinging to their skin. The desperation had passed, and, in its place, something new and terrifyingly fragile had grown. He was gentle now. His touch, which had been so fierce, was now hesitant, tender. He ran his fingers lightly over the bruises on her back, his touch so soft it was barely a whisper. But she flinched. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick. "It wasn't you," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "It was—" His anger was back, a low, burning ember. "I hit him. I made him angry. And I left you to pay for it." "You came back," she said, lifting her head. "You left the salve." He looked at her in the moonlight, his scarred face a landscape of shadows. He had never, in his entire life, been looked at the way she was looking at him, as if he were a savior. He, who had only ever known how to destroy. He touched her face, tracing the line of her jaw. "Lorna," he said, and her name was a prayer. He showed her a tenderness she had never known. He kissed her eyelids. He kissed the palms of her hands. He kissed the bruised, aching skin of her shoulder. His lips a promise of healing. Their intimacy, which had begun in a desperate storm, now became a quiet, healing rain. He treated her body not as property, not as a vessel for debt, but as something sacred. And in his arms, in the ruins of an abandoned shack, Lorna, for the first time in her life, felt not just safe, but whole. They did not sleep. They talked. They whispered their histories again, not as confessions, but as gifts. They held each other, flesh to flesh, a silent vow against the coldness of the world. When the first gray light of dawn touched the canyon rim, the reality of their situation returned. Lorna sat up, pulling the tattered remains of a blanket around her shoulders. The light was harsh, revealing the dirt, the hay, the poverty of the small space. She looked at her worn, stained dress. She looked at her bare, dirty feet. "I am ruined," she whispered. The word was a stone in her throat. Before, she was a bride of debt, a captive. But now, in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of any law, she was a fallen woman, an adulteress. She had given Coyle the very weapon he needed to destroy her completely. Elias, who was pulling on his boots, went still. He stood and walked to her, crouching in front of her. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "No," he said, his voice fierce. "Do not ever say that." "But You are not his. You were never his. A man cannot sell a person. Lorna, not in the eyes of God, and not in the eyes of the law. No matter what Coyle says, that marriage is a lie. You are not his wife. You are a prisoner." He brushed the hair from her face. "And you are not ruined. You are whole. You have always been whole. He is the one who is broken." His certainty was a balm. She wanted to believe him. She leaned her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "What do we do, Elias?" "You go back," he said, and her eyes snapped open, the fear returning. "You go back before he returns. You pretend. You be the prisoner he thinks you are." "And you?" she asked, her hands gripping his arms. "Will you leave? Will you run?" "No," he said. "I'm not running anymore. I'm going to finish this." He walked her to the mouth of the canyon, his eyes constantly scanning the ridge. He kissed her, a long, deep kiss that was a promise of return. "Be strong, Lorna. Just a little while longer." She ran back, her heart a confusion of terror and a love so profound it ached. She got back to the house just as the sun was truly rising. She was washing her face in the basin, trying to erase the traces of the night, when Coyle returned. He was in a foul mood. He stormed into the house, threw his hat on the floor, and yelled for coffee. Lorna brought it to him, her hands steady, her eyes on the floor. But something was different. She was different. The raw, animal terror she used to feel in his presence was gone. It was replaced by a cold, watchful defiance. She was no longer just a victim. She was a woman with a secret, a woman who had been loved. Coyle noticed. Over the next week, he watched her. She was still quiet, still did her chores, but she did not flinch when he entered a room. She did not tremble when he yelled. She met his gaze, her own eyes holding a new, unnerving calm. He was a man who understood fear. It was his primary currency. And this absence of fear infuriated him. His property was no longer afraid. He decided to break her. He confronted her after supper. In the main room, he had been drinking. "We have been playing a game. Payment," he said, his voice a low sneer. "You, the frightened bride, and I, the patient husband. I am tired of the game." Lorna said nothing. She just stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped in front of her. "This marriage," he said, using his fingers to make quotes in the air, "is a farce. And you are walking around this house with a look on your face I do not appreciate. It is time you remembered what you are. It is time we made this marriage real." He unbuckled his belt. Not for a beating. He let it hang. "Come, wife, to my bed." Lorna's heart hammered. This was it. "No." The word was quiet, but it echoed in the room. Coyle's smile froze. "What did you say?" "No," she said, louder this time. She met his gaze. "I will not." He was stunned, for a moment, by the sheer audacity. Then his face contorted in rage. He crossed the room in 2 strides and backhanded her, the force of the blow sending her crashing into the stone of the fireplace. "You are my wife," he roared. "You will obey me." She pushed herself up, her lips split, the coppery taste of blood in her mouth. She looked at him, not with fear, but with a cold, clear hatred. "You can beat me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You can kill me, but I will not come to your bed. I am not your wife. I am not your property." He stared at her, his chest heaving. He saw the truth in her eyes. He could beat her body, but her spirit, the thing he had wanted to break, had somehow slipped his grasp. He could not break her now without killing her, and that, in its own way, was a defeat. He let out a strangled cry of rage, turned, and swept a lamp off the table. Shattering it, he stormed out of the house, roaring for his horse. 2 days later, Lorna was kneading dough in the kitchen when she saw him. Elias. He was walking up to the ranch house. His shoulders slumped, his hat in his hands. He looked dirty, starved, and broken. Her heart seized. Coyle came out onto the porch, a rifle cradled in his arm. He looked at Elias with utter contempt. I came to beg for my job. Mr. Atwater," Elias said, his voice flat, defeated, loud enough for Lorna to hear. "I was a fool. I lost my head. I ain't got nowhere to go. I'll work for half pay. I just need the job." Lorna's hand stilled in the dough. No, this wasn't the plan. This was defeat. Coyle laughed, a genuine, cruel, delighted laugh. He looked at the man who had struck him, and he saw him, humbled, begging. This was better than any beating. "Half pay?" Coyle mused. He was suspicious, but he was also short-handed, and Elias was the best horseman he had. More than that, Coyle loved the idea of this man, this scar-faced fool who had dared to touch him, working under his heel, humiliated. "Half pay," Coyle said, savoring the words. "And you don't sleep in the bunkhouse. You sleep in the barn, with the animals. And if you so much as look at her," he jerked his head toward the house, "I will shoot you where you stand. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Elias said, his eyes fixed on the dirt. "Thank you, sir." Coyle smiled. "Get to work. The stables are a pigsty." Elias turned and walked to the barn, not once looking at the house. Lorna's hope, which had burned so brightly, guttered and died. He had come back, not as a savior, but as a beggar. He was trapped, just like her. Elias worked. He was a ghost. He was silent, invisible. He did the worst jobs without complaint. He mucked stalls. He fixed the broken windmill. He dug ditches. He never looked at Lorna. He never spoke to anyone. But his work took him everywhere. Coyle, in a final act of humiliation, ordered him to clean the study and scrub the floor where you bled on it, he'd said, laughing. So Elias was in the study. He was in the storerooms. He was in the barn, late at night, when he was supposed to be sleeping. One evening, Lorna was fetching water from the creek. She saw him in the barn, by the faint light of a shrouded lantern. He was writing. He had a small ledger, one she did not recognize, and he was writing in it. He looked up, saw her, and quickly hid the book in his boot. He wasn't broken. He was working. He was gathering evidence. In the study, Coyle's ledgers, the real ones, were hidden under a false bottom in his desk. Elias found them. He found the entries for H.H. 100 head. Stolen horses. He found the list of men who were working off debt. Men who had been there for years, trapped in a bondage little better than slavery. He found the receipts for vast shipments of cattle, with no corresponding tax payments. He had to get this to town. He waited a week, then went to Coyle. He said a horse had thrown a shoe. and he needed to ride to the blacksmith. Coyle, irritated, agreed. Elias did not go to the blacksmith. He went to the small, dusty office of Judge Miller, a retired circuit judge who now practiced law, and who had a long, deep-seated hatred for Coyle Atwater. Elias laid it all out. The stolen ledger pages, the debt slavery, the tax evasion, and finally, Lorna. He didn't marry her, Elias said, his voice low and tight. He bought her. Her stepfather sold her for a $400 gambling debt. Miller, who had been leaning back in his chair, sat up straight. That son is illegal. A man cannot sell a person. Not even in this territory. But Coyle's got the sheriff in his pocket. This evidence, Elias said, tapping the papers. It's enough to bring in a marshal. The tax evasion will get the government's attention. Miller steepled his fingers, a predatory gleam in his old eyes. Yes, it will. We can build a case. But for the girl, that's a different matter. We can file for an annulment. The marriage was a sham, performed under duress, to cover an illegal debt. Elias returned to the ranch with a new shoe on the horse, and a plan. That night, he met Lorna by the stream. She was there, waiting, as he knew she would be. She ran to him, and he held her, his heart aching with the risk they were taking. He told her the plan. He told her about Miller. He told her about the marshal. She was filled with a terrifying, breathtaking hope. He was her savior. He was giving her a life. But as she stood there, held in his arms, a new fear, a colder, more insidious fear, crept in. She watched him, this quiet, scarred man, who was moving heaven and earth to save her. Elias, she whispered, her voice small. What happens? After, he said, confused. After, you'll be free. Free, she repeated. But what if I'm only free because you're protecting me? What if I'm just trading one man's house for another? She clutched his shirt. What if I can't stand on my own, Elias? What if I'm only strong because you're holding me up? He understood her fear. He pulled back, holding her at arm's length, forcing her to look at him. Lorna, listen to me, he said, his voice firm. I am not holding you up. You've been standing on your own this whole damn time. You stood up to him, alone, in that house. I'm just here to knock down the man who's holding you down. You'll do the standing yourself. I've got no doubt about that. She looked at him, her heart torn between a love so profound it felt like it might split her in two, and the deep, cold fear of her own weakness. She wanted to believe him, but she knew, as she watched him melt back into the shadows toward the barn, that the final confrontation was coming, and she did not know if she was strong enough to survive it. It was a mistake, a small, simple mistake, born of a single moment of weakness. Lorna had been so careful. Elias had been so careful. For 2 weeks, they had lived their separate, silent lives. He, the beaten-down hand sleeping in the barn, she, the defiant prisoner in the house. They communicated only in fleeting glances across the ranch yard, glances that Coyle, in his smug arrogance, mistook for fear or hatred. But tonight, the moon was full, and the air was thick with the coming of a storm, a nervous, electric tension that mirrored her own. She had gone to the stream. She had not planned to. She had told herself it was too dangerous. But her feet had carried her there, to the place where he had first kissed her, where he had promised her a future. She had waited. He had not come. He was being careful. He was following the plan. She was halfway back to the house, her heart aching with a fresh loneliness, when she saw the cigar, a single red, glowing eye in the darkness of the porch. Coyle Atwater was sitting in his chair, a dark silhouette against the house. He had been waiting. You like the stream, don't you? Payment? His voice slid out of the darkness, oily and calm. You seem to find your way there, even when you're told not to. Lorna froze. The bread and cheese she'd stolen for Elias, hidden in her pocket, suddenly felt like a lead weight. I was just... You were just... he mimicked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He stood up. The chair scraped loudly on the porch boards. He's been back for 2 weeks. I've watched you. I've watched him. The beaten dog. The quiet mouse. Did you think I was a fool? He walked down the steps, his boots thudding on the packed earth. He was close now. So close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. You've been meeting him, he stated. It was not a question. My property, lying with my hired hand, in my barn. No, she cried, the lie desperate and thin. Never, I hate him. Liar, he hissed. He grabbed the front of her dress, his fist twisting the fabric. He was not just angry. This was a different kind of rage. This was the rage of a man who had been utterly, completely, and totally defied. His power was a sham, and she had proved it. He found the food in her pocket. He pulled it out, the bread and cheese, and held it up in the moonlight. For your lover? He sneered. Stealing my food for the dog in my barn? He backhanded her. The blow was so hard her head snapped back, stars exploding behind her eyes. He did not let go of her dress. He started walking, dragging her, half choking, toward the barn. You want to be with the animals? He roared, his control finally breaking. Then you can be chained like one. He threw her through the barn door. She landed hard on the straw-covered floor. The wind knocked out of her. The barn was dark, save for the pale squares of moonlight from the high windows. Elias was not there. He was sleeping, as he was supposed to, in the last stall. Coil, please, she sobbed, scrambling backward. Don't do this, please. He lit a lantern, the yellow light throwing grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls. He was smiling. You begged him. I'm sure. Did you beg him when you were on your back in the hay? He grabbed a heavy logging chain, the kind used for pulling stumps, from a peg on the wall. He advanced on her. She screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the rising wind. He was strong. He wrapped the chain around her waist, pulling it so tight she could barely breathe. He looped the other end around a massive support post, one of the main posts that held up the hayloft. He fumbled with a heavy iron padlock. There, he panted, snapping the lock shut. Now, you are mine. You are here, and you will not run. She was chained to the post, the cold iron biting into her waist. He'll come for you, I know, Coyle said, his voice conversational again, which was somehow more terrifying. He picked up a long, black bullwhip from the wall. He ran his hand along its braided leather. But he'll be too late. I'm going to teach you, once and for all, what happens when you defy me. No, Coyle, please. He will hear you scream, Coyle said. He uncoiled the whip, and he will know he is too weak to stop me. He will know that I won, that you are, and always will be. Mine. He raised the whip. Drop it, Coyle. The voice came from the barn door. Elias stood there, silhouetted, holding his rifle. It was not pointed at Coyle. It was held in one hand, pointed at the floor. A simple, declarative statement. Coyle froze, the whip still in his hand. His back was to Elias. He turned, slowly, a look of pure, murderous hatred on his face. So, the beaten dog has teeth after all. Coyle sneered. She's not worth it. Elias, she's soiled goods. Let her go, Elias said. His voice was dead calm. He took a step into the barn. The lantern light caught the scar on his face, made it look like a fresh wound. Or you'll what, shoot me? Coyle laughed. You shoot me, you'll hang, and I'll have my men hunt her down and kill her before my body is cold. You'll doom her. I'm not going to shoot you, Elias said. He calmly leaned the rifle against the wall, just inside the door. But you are going to let her go. I think not. Coyle let the whip fall to the floor. His hand moved to the heavy key ring on his belt, where the key to the padlock was. He unhooked the ring. You want the key? Come and get it. He lunged. He was not going for Elias. He was going for the rifle. Elias moved like a snake. He intercepted Coyle, his body crashing into the smaller man, sending them both tumbling into a pile of empty feed sacks. It was not a fight. It was an explosion. This was not the single punch in the study. This was two men fighting for their lives, for their souls. Elias's rage, the one he had held in check for weeks, the one he had carried since he was a boy in Ohio, erupted. Coyle was fighting with the desperate, vicious terror of a cornered animal, a man who saw his entire world, his entire empire of fear, collapsing. Coyle kneed Elias in the groin. Elias roared in pain, but his hands found Coyle's throat. They rolled, kicking, punching, biting. The sounds were animalistic, grunts of effort and sharp cries of pain. Lorna screamed, her voice hoarse, pulling at the chain. "Elias, stop! He'll kill you!" They crashed into a stall. A horse, terrified, reared and kicked, splintering the wood. Coyle, his face a mask of blood, scrambled for a pitchfork. Elias saw it. He kicked, catching Coyle's wrist, sending the pitchfork flying. Elias was on top of him, his knuckles raw, his blood dripping onto Coyle's face. He hit him, once, twice, 3 times. Solid, brutal blows, until Coyle Atwater, the man who owned the valley, went limp. Elias lay on top of him for a long second, his breath sawing in his chest. He was shaking, the adrenaline so potent it made him sick. "Elias?" Lorna's voice was a terrified whisper. He pushed himself off Coyle. His lip was split, his eye already swelling. He was bloodied, but he was alive. He found the key ring. He staggered to Lorna, his hands fumbling with the lock. He didn't hurt you?" he panted, his words slurred. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "He didn't get to—" The lock clicked. The heavy chain fell from her waist with a crash. She was free. She fell into his arms, sobbing, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing on earth. He held her for a second. "We have to go, now." He grabbed his rifle. He looked down at Coyle, who was beginning to groan. Elias raised the butt of the rifle. "No," Lorna said, grabbing his arm. Don't be him." He hesitated. He looked at Coyle's bloody, unconscious face. He lowered the rifle. "You're right." He grabbed the coil of rope Coyle had meant to fetch in this very barn. He tied Coyle's hands and feet, quickly, expertly. "He'll be free in an hour. We have to be gone." "Where?" "Town. To Miller." He grabbed a saddle, his movements frantic. "Saddle the mare, the one you like. I'll get my horse." In 5 minutes, they were ready. Elias grabbed a sack, filling it with canteens, the rest of the salve, and a few strips of dried beef. He held Coyle at gunpoint as the man stirred. "You're dead, Elias!" Coyle spat, blood and a broken tooth falling from his mouth. "You're both dead. I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Get in line," Elias said. He backed out of the barn, pulling Lorna with him. They mounted. "We ride south," he said. "Through the canyon." "It's longer, but he'll think we went for the main road. Go!" They plunged into the night. The wind that had been rising was now a solid wall. The air, which had been electric, was now heavy and wet. The storm had broken. They rode hard for the first hour, the horses slipping and sliding on the rocky terrain of the canyon. The moon was blotted out by thick, churning clouds. The world went black, a suffocating velvet darkness punctuated only by the sound of their horses' hooves and the rising scream of the wind. Then the lightning started. It was not gentle, it was violent, cracking the sky in half, forked, angry bolts that struck the canyon rim. In those brilliant, terrifying flashes, Lorna could see Elias's face, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the trail, his face a mask of blood and rain. The thunder was instantaneous, a cannonade that shook the very ground, echoing off the canyon walls until it sounded like the rocks themselves were screaming. Then came the rain. It was not a rain, it was a deluge, a solid sheet of water that turned the dry arroyo into a river in minutes. "We have to get to higher ground," Elias yelled over the roar. He grabbed her mare's reins, pulling her up a steep, crumbling game trail. The horses whinnied, terrified. The ground beneath them was turning to mud, a slick, treacherous soup. They reached a small ledge, a shallow overhang in the rock, just as a wall of water. A flash flood roared through the canyon bottom where they had been seconds before. It was a churning, muddy monster. carrying with it boulders and entire trees. They were trapped, huddled under the rock, the rain lashing them, the world a chaos of water and sound. "We wait it out," Elias shouted, his voice hoarse. "It'll pass by morning." They dismounted, huddling together for warmth, the horses trembling with fear beside them. Lorna was shaking, her teeth chattering, but she was not just cold. She was alive. She was with him. The hours passed. The storm raged. Sometime after midnight, the rain began to lessen, the lightning moving east. "We should go," Elias said, his voice raw. "We can't stay here." "Elias, you're bleeding," she said, touching his face. The cut on his eye was bad, swollen shut. "It's fine. We have to—" He pushed himself away from the rock, taking a step toward his horse, and he stopped. He let out a sound, a sharp, surprised grunt, and looked down. Lorna did not understand. "Elias, what is it?" In the next flash of lightning, she saw it, coiled by his boot, its tail a blur, was a rattlesnake. It struck again, a dark, fast-moving shadow, before slithering away into the rocks. "Elias!" she screamed. He stumbled back, his face a sudden, ashen gray. He fell against the wall, sliding to the ground. "No," he whispered. "No." He had been bitten, twice, in the calf, through his boot. "No!" Lorna cried, throwing herself to her knees beside him. "No, you can't!" She saw the two dark spots, already swelling. "Lorna!" he gasped, his voice tight. "The knife! My boot!" She fumbled for it, her hands numb with terror. She pulled it from its sheath. The poison! I have to— "No!" he said, grabbing her wrist. "No cutting. It won't work. The salve in the bag. And whiskey. Is there whiskey?" She scrambled for the bag. She found the salve and a small flask. His emergency supplies. He ripped his pant leg. The leg was already swelling, a dark, angry purple. "The salve, on the wound, and the whiskey. You drink it, for the cold." "Elias, don't talk," she sobbed, scooping the green salve with trembling fingers, plastering it on the fang marks. "It's for shock. You need it." "No, you—" His breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. "The plan doesn't change. You ride to town. You find Miller." "I am not leaving you," she shrieked, the sound echoing in the canyon. "You have to," he panted. "The evidence—" "It's in my saddlebag. The ledger pages, you give them to Miller. You tell him—" He grimaced, his body seized by a sudden, violent shiver. "Lorna, I'm cold." "We have to move," she said, her terror replaced by a sudden, cold clarity. She was the one standing. He was the one on the ground. "We have to find shelter." She looked around. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The ledge was exposed. Higher up, she saw a shadow, a dark opening in the rock, a cave. "We're going there. Lorna, I can't. Leave me." You told me I was strong," she said, her voice a low, fierce growl. "You told me I could stand. Now, you shut up and let me—" She got his arm over her shoulder. He was a dead weight. He tried to help, but his legs were already numb. She dragged him. Every step was an agony. The rock was slick, her bare feet slipping. She fell, his weight crushing her. She did not cry. She grunted, pushed herself up, and dragged him again. It took her 30 minutes to move him 50 feet. She pulled him into the cave, a shallow, dry opening, and collapsed beside him. He was shivering violently, his skin clammy, his breathing shallow. "The horses!" she panted. She went back out, got the saddlebags, the canteens, and the blankets from the saddle rolls. She unsaddled the horses, leaving them to find what shelter they could. She ran back to him. She covered him with the dry blankets. It wasn't enough. He was shaking, his teeth chattering so hard she thought they would break. She did the only thing she could. She lay down beside him, under the blankets, and wrapped her body around his, trying to force her own meager warmth into his dying flesh. She sobbed, silently, her face pressed into his neck. He felt so cold. You can't die, she whispered, the words a fierce, desperate prayer. You can't. You promised me forever. You hear me, Elias. You promised. You are not allowed to die. She held him, her arms locked around his chest. As the last of the storm passed and the long, cold night slowly, agonizingly, gave way to a pale, gray dawn, she must have slept, a fitful, exhausted doze. She awoke with a start. The cave was light. Elias was still, too still. Elias, she whispered, her heart stopping. She touched his face. He was not cold. He was burning. A raging fever. He was alive. She sat up, her body aching, her mind racing. She had to get the fever down. She had to get him to town. She took a canteen and a strip of her own skirt, which she tore off. She bathed his face, his neck. He moaned, his eyes fluttering. Lorna? His voice was a dry, cracked sound. I'm here, she said, tears of relief streaming down her face. I'm here. Elias. His eyes focused on her. He saw her, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her hair a wild tangle, her dress torn. You're beautiful, he whispered. She let out a choked laugh. You're a fool, and you're alive. Hurts, he said, his gaze moving to his leg. It was swollen to twice its size, black and purple. I know. I'm going to get you to town. I'm going to get you to a doctor. He grabbed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. The evidence, Lorna, Coil. I have it, she said. I have it all. He won't win. Now, you rest. She kissed him. A trembling, desperate kiss. He was weak, but he kissed her back. It was a kiss that tasted of fever and fear and a love that had, in the long, dark night, proven itself stronger than death. It took them all day to reach town. She got him on his horse, tying him to the saddle. She walked beside him, leading both animals, her bare feet raw and bleeding. They were a vision from a nightmare when they arrived. A half-dead man, a wild-eyed, ragged woman. She did not go to the doctor. She went to the office of Judge Miller. She burst through the door. Miller looked up, shocked. My God, child! Are you Judge Miller? She panted. I am Elias. He needs a doctor. He has the evidence. She pulled the oilskin pouch from the saddlebag. She dumped the ledger pages on his desk. Coil Atwater. He's a thief, a slaver. He sold me, and he tried to kill us. Miller looked at the pages. He looked at Elias, slumped over, barely conscious. He looked at Lorna, standing in a puddle of muddy water, defiant and broken. Marshal, Miller roared, stepping out his door. Get a doctor and get your rifle. We've got work to do. A warrant for Coil Atwater's arrest was signed within the hour. The rest was a blur. A doctor took Elias. They talked about amputation. Lorna refused to leave his side. 2 days later, a circuit judge, summoned by Miller, held an emergency hearing in the town hall. Lorna, cleaned and dressed in clothes borrowed from the doctor's wife, stood before him. The judge looked at the evidence. He listened to Miller. He looked at Lorna. This is not a court of law, the judge said, his voice booming. But it is a court of justice. The debt owed by Marcus, your stepfather, is hereby ruled invalid. A human being cannot be chattel, not in this territory, not anywhere. The marriage was performed under duress to cover an illegal and immoral transaction. It is nullified. You are a free woman, miss, and a restraining order is hereby issued. Coil Atwater is forbidden from coming within 50 miles of you. Free. The word sounded strange, like a language she didn't speak. She was taken in by a widow, a kind woman named Mrs. Finch, who had a room to spare. She had a bed, she had clean clothes, she had food, and she was utterly, completely unmoored. She would sit on the porch of the widow's house, watching the street. She saw Judge Miller and the marshal ride out, a posse behind them, to arrest Coil Atwater, and she watched the doctor's house. Elias was there, healing. The doctor had saved his leg. The fever had broken. He was recovering. He was alive. He was a hero. And she was the bride of debt, the woman who had been saved. She watched him from afar, this man who had given her back her life. She was free, but she had never felt more uncertain. What did this new life look like? And in this new, free life, did he still want her? The town of Socorro, which had seemed a distant, impossible sanctuary, was now Lorna's whole world, and it was a world holding its breath. The air was thick with Coil Atwater. He was not there, but his shadow was. The marshal and his posse had ridden out to the CA ranch, armed with a warrant for arrest on charges of tax evasion, fraud, and illegal imprisonment. They had found the ranch all but abandoned. The foreman and the other hands, seeing the evidence of the fight in the barn and Coil's subsequent murderous rage, had taken their pay, and in some cases, Coil's horses, and scattered. Atwater himself was gone. For 3 days, the town lived on this nervous energy. Lorna stayed with Mrs. Finch, a woman whose quiet, unasking kindness was a balm. Lorna helped her in the garden, kneaded dough in a clean kitchen, and slept in a real bed with a thick quilt. It was a life so normal. It felt like a dream she was about to wake from. She saw Elias every day, though they did not speak. He was staying in a room at the doctor's house, his payment a stack of Coil's stolen ledger pages that Judge Miller had given the doctor as collateral. He was healing. He sat on the doctor's porch, his bandaged leg propped up on a stool, his face a roadmap of fading bruises. He would be whittling, his hands always needing to be busy. He would watch the street. Lorna would walk by, on her way to the mercantile for Mrs. Finch, and she would see him. He would see her. He would nod, a short, formal gesture. She would incline her head, her heart a confusion of gratitude and a strange, cold ache. He was giving her space. The thought was a torment. Was he giving her space to heal, or was he giving her space to leave? He had seen her as a prisoner, a victim. Did he still want the free woman? Did he, a man who had wandered his whole life, even know how to stay? She was terrified that he, having been her savior, would now do the kindest, most terrible thing, and simply wander on. On the 4th day, Coil Atwater came for her. He did not sneak in. He rode down the center of the main street, as if he still owned it. He had 4 men with him, hired guns, their faces hard and unfamiliar. They were not his old ranch hands. These were men paid for violence. Coil himself was clean-shaven, dressed in his finest black suit. His lip was still split, his eyes still purple, but his rage had been cooled, frozen into a block of pure, murderous intent. He rode directly to the sheriff's office. The town went silent. Shop doors closed. Windows were shuttered. Lorna was at the mercantile, buying flour. She heard the horses and looked out the window. Her blood turned to ice. It was him. "Get in the back, child," the shopkeeper whispered, his face pale. "No," Lorna said. Her voice was a croak. She was free. The judge had said so, but the law felt 1,000 miles away. Coil and his men dismounted. Judge Miller stepped out of his office, his face grim. The marshal, his star gleaming, came out of the saloon, a rifle in his hand. "Coil Atwater," the marshal said, his voice booming. "You are under arrest." Coil laughed. "Are you, Marshal? You in what army? You rode to my ranch. I wasn't there. You have no right." "I have a warrant, signed by a circuit judge." "A warrant?" Coil sneered. "Based on the testimony of a runaway hand and a lunatic woman." He stepped onto the boardwalk. "I am here for my property. My wife." Lorna's heart stopped. "She is not your wife." "Coil," Judge Miller said, his voice shaking with old man's rage. "The marriage was nullified." "By you?" Coil spat. "A drunk, disbarred lawyer. I have a marriage certificate. I have a bill of sale. She is mine. Give her to me, or this town will burn." His 4 men spread out, their hands hovering over their pistols. The marshal looked at them, then at the sheriff, who was half hidden in his doorway. "This is not your fight, Marshal," Coil said, his voice reasonable. This is a domestic matter." "He's right," Elias said. The voice came from the doctor's porch. Lorna's head snapped around. Elias was standing at the edge of the boardwalk, 50 yards away. He was not wearing a gun. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his bad legs stiff, his face pale. He looked weak and impossibly, terrifyingly brave. "It's not your fight. Marshal," Elias called out, his voice clear in the silence. "It's mine." Coyle turned. When he saw Elias, his face, which had been cold, contorted with a sudden, beautiful joy. This was what he had come for. "Elias," he purred. "The hero. Come to save her again? You look half dead. And you're unarmed." "I am," Elias agreed. He took one painful step off the boardwalk, into the dusty street. "And you're a coward. Coyle, you always were." "I am a man of property," Coyle said. "And you are a thief. You stole from me. You don't own her. I paid $400 for her," Coyle roared, his control finally snapping. "She is mine! Get off the street, Elias," the marshal growled, raising his rifle. "No," Elias said, his eyes locked on Coyle. "He's right about one thing. It's a domestic matter. It's between him and me. He wants what he paid for. Then let him collect." Lorna, her bag of flour forgotten, stumbled out of the mercantile. "Elias, no, he'll kill you." Coyle looked at her, and his smile widened. "There she is, my blushing bride." He turned back to Elias. "You're right. Let's settle it. You and me. For her." He was goading him. He wanted Elias to draw a gun he didn't have. "I don't have a gun," Elias said simply. "Then this will be quick," Coyle said, his hand dropping to his pistol. "I wouldn't," the marshal said. "You draw on an unarmed man, Coyle, and my deputies." He gestured to the rooftops, where 2 more men with rifles had appeared. "We'll cut you in half." "And I," a new voice said, "will arrest you for disturbing the peace." The town sheriff stepped out of his office. He was a small, pot-bellied man who had owed Coyle money for years, but he was also a man who saw which way the wind was blowing. The marshal, the judge, the federal warrant. Coyle's power was broken. "Coyle Atwater," the sheriff said, his voice surprisingly firm. "You are under arrest for threatening the peace of this town, and for fraud, tax evasion, and kidnapping," Judge Miller supplied. Coyle stared at him. He looked at the sheriff, who had betrayed him. He looked at the armed men on the roofs. He looked at the townsfolk, who were now coming out of their shops, their faces hard. And he looked at Elias, who stood unarmed and wounded, having beaten him without throwing a punch. "You," Coyle whispered, "you think you've won?" He looked at Lorna. "You think you're free of me?" His hand moved, a blur. He was not drawing on Elias. He was drawing on her. Lorna screamed. She did not hear the shot. She saw Elias, who should not have been able to move, lunge. He threw his body, his wounded, weak body, in front of her, crashing into her, sending them both to the wooden boardwalk as a bullet splintered the wall where she had been standing. The world exploded in gunfire. It was not a shootout. It was an execution. The marshal's men, the sheriff, even Judge Miller, who was holding an old buffalo rifle, opened fire. Coyle and his 4 men were cut down in a hail of lead. Lorna was on her back, the breath knocked out of her. Elias's heavy, blessedly warm body on top of her. He was groaning, his face pale. "Elias," she gasped. "Are you hit? Are you hit?" He rolled off her, his face a mask of agony. "My leg," he panted. I think I just landed on it wrong." He was alive. He had, again, been willing to die for her. The street was silent, the air thick with smoke. Men were dragging Coyle's body, his eyes open and staring at the sky, his hand still clutching his pistol. Lorna knelt beside Elias, her hand on his chest. "You're a fool," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "A magnificent, beautiful fool." "He's dead," Elias whispered, looking at the body being dragged away. He's screaming that you're his property." Lorna looked. Coyle's body was inert, silent. She looked at Elias, confused. Elias's eyes were closed. I can still hear him, in my head, screaming, "She's mine! She's mine!" "Elias," she said, her heart breaking. He was alive. He had won, but he was still trapped. The trial was 2 days later. It was not a trial for Coyle, who was buried in an unmarked grave, but a trial for Lorna's freedom. The circuit judge was back. The courtroom was packed. Lorna had to stand, her hand on a Bible, and she had to testify. She had to tell them, all of them. She saw her stepfather, Marcus, in the back row, brought in by the marshal. He looked old, broken, and terrified. "Miss Lorna," the judge said, his voice gentle. "Please, tell the court what happened." She stood there, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip the railing. Her voice was a whisper. I. She looked out at the faces, the curious, the pitying, the smug, and she saw Elias. He was sitting in the front row, his leg propped up, his face pale, but his eyes were locked on hers, and they held no pity. They held only a fierce, unwavering belief. She took a breath. She let go of the railing. Her voice was small, but it was clear, and it did not shake. "My name is Lorna. My stepfather, Marcus, sold me. He sold me to Coyle Atwater for $412. He called me a bride of debt." She told them everything. The humiliation, the starvation, the pantry, Coyle's threats, the beatings, the chain. She told them of Elias's kindness. She told them of the escape, the storm, the snake. She told them of Coyle's return and how Elias had thrown himself in front of her. She spoke for an hour, and when she was done, there was a profound, heavy silence in the room. The judge cleared his throat. He looked at Marcus. "Is this true, sir? Did you sell this woman?" Marcus put his head in his hands. It was the debt," he mumbled. "I had no choice." "You had a choice," the judge said, his voice like ice. "You just made the wrong one." He slammed his gavel. "The marriage is nullified. The debt is void. This court rules that Lorna, Miss," he corrected himself, "is, and always has been, a free and independent woman. Marcus is remanded to custody for his part in this travesty, and this court officially declares the CA Ranch and all its assets forfeit to the territory. In lieu of the taxes Coyle Atwater never paid. Case closed. It was over. People crowded around her, shaking her hand, patting her shoulder. Mrs. Finch was weeping. Judge Miller was smiling. Lorna felt empty. She was free. She was no longer a bride of debt. She was no longer a victim. She was nothing. She was unmoored, a ship cut loose from its anchor, floating in a vast, unknown sea. She looked for Elias. He was gone. He had slipped out during the commotion. She found her way back to Mrs. Finch's house. She sat on the porch, watching the sun set, the sky a riot of purple and orange. She was free. She did not see him for 2 days. He was gone from the doctor's house. Mrs. Finch said he had bought a horse, a new one, and some supplies. He was wandering again. He had saved her, and now he was leaving. The pain of it was a cold, sharp blade, worse than any beating Coyle had given her. He had given her back her life, and she did not know how to live it without him. On the 3rd night, she couldn't stand it. She couldn't sleep. The moon was a sliver, the starlight bright. She walked. She did not know where she was going, but her feet seemed to know. She walked out of town, down the dark, dusty road, toward the creek. Not the creek by the ranch, but the small, clear stream that ran south of town. She found him there. He was sitting by the water, his back against a cottonwood, his bad legs stretched out. His horse was grazing nearby. He was not wandering. He was waiting. He did not seem surprised to see her. He watched her approach, his scarred face unreadable in the starlight. "You're leaving," she said. It was not a question. "I thought about it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Why?" she asked. her voice breaking. "After everything? Why?" "Because," he said, looking at the water, "you're free, Lorna. You're free of him. You should be free of all of it, of me, of the man who was part of it. You deserve to be clean, to start over, with a good man, a whole one." She stood over him, her shadow falling across his. "A whole one? You think you're not whole?" He looked up at her, and his eyes were filled with an anguish that broke her heart. "Lorna, I've been in prison. I've killed. I have a rage in me that scares me. I saw what I did to Coyle. I enjoyed it. And you're like that book your mother had. You're good. And I'm the man who's read you until the pages are soft. I'm afraid I'll tear you." She had been afraid she was only strong because of him, and he was afraid he would only ever hurt her. They were two fools in the dark. She knelt in front of him, in the dirt. "Elias," she said, her voice soft, but as unshakable as it had been in the courtroom. "You didn't just save me. You didn't just pull me from a fire. You gave me back to myself. I was a thing, a payment. And you looked at me, and you saw a person. You saw me. You didn't save me. You just reminded me who I was." "Lorna," he whispered, his voice thick with a pain she knew was not physical. I'm not worthy of you." "Worthy?" she said. The word was absurd. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart. She could feel its steady, strong beat. "He said I was a bride of debt. He said he paid $400 for me." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "You already paid it. Elia, you paid it, with everything." He let out a sound, a low, shuddering breath he had been holding. It seemed, for 7 years. His arms came around her, pulling her close. "I love you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I love you so much, Lorna, and I'm so afraid of hurting you." "You won't," she said. She kissed him. It was not the desperate kiss of the line shack. It was not the trembling, feverish kiss of the cave. It was a slow, tender, deliberate kiss. It was a choice. He held her face, his rough thumbs tracing her cheekbones, as if memorizing her. He kissed her again, deeply, a kiss of lingering, profound reunion. Passion and love intertwined, a slow, healing fire that warmed them from the inside out. They clung to each other, two survivors, two whole people, finding their anchor in the starlight. They talked for a long time. They lay by the stream, his arms around her, her head on his chest. "What now?" he asked, his voice a whisper in her hair. "What kind of life do you want, Lorna? I'll give you anything. I'll take you anywhere. California, the ocean." She was quiet for a long time. She thought of the ranch. She thought of the town. She thought of the future, that vast, unknown sea. It was not frightening. It was open. "I want a small life, Elias," she said, her voice soft. "I don't want to run. I'm tired of running. I want a home." She smiled, a small, sad, beautiful smile. "I want one where no one owns either of us, but we choose each other. Every day." He held her tighter. "Every day. Lorna." The high, thin wind of winter gave way to the soft, wet breath of spring, and then to the broad, hot silence of summer. Time, which had once been a thing to be endured, a series of agonizing moments, became a river. It flowed. Months passed. The trial and the violence in the street faded from immediate, sharp-edged terror into a scar, a story that the town told itself. Elias's leg healed. The dark, angry purple of the snakebite faded, leaving behind 2 small, white marks on his calf, a reminder of the night the canyon had tried to claim him. He walked with a slight, almost imperceptible, limp, but he was strong. He had his pay from the CA ranch, the money he had been saving to wander on. He had not wandered. he also had a reward. A small one. From the territorial government. For the information that had led to the seizure of Coyle's assets. It was not a fortune. It was, however, enough. They bought a small plot of land, 20 acres, west of town. It was high on a low mesa, far from the main road, far from the shadow of the CA ranch, which now sat empty, a monument to a dead man's cruelty. Their land was not prime. It was rocky, covered in sage and juniper, but it had a view that stretched 50 miles, and it had a spring, a thin trickle of clean water that bubbled up from the rock. They lived in a tent while they built. Elias, his hands no longer just those of a horsebreaker, but those of a builder, cut and hewed the juniper logs. He was slow, methodical, his work precise. He was not building a fortress to keep the world out. He was building a home to keep them in. Lorna worked beside him. Her hands, once raw from lye soap, now strong and calloused from her own work. She chinked the logs with mud and straw, her small hands fitting into the spaces his could not reach. They worked as a team, a silent, efficient engine. They spoke little, but their movements were a conversation. He would lift a log. She would be there with the brace. She would mix the mud. He would be ready to receive it. They were building more than a house. They were building a life. Log by log. The house was simple. 2 rooms, a main room for cooking, eating, and living, and a small bedroom. A fireplace, built of river stone Elias had hauled from the creek. Drew perfectly. It was solid. It was sound. It was theirs. They lived simply. The land, once cleared, was stubborn, but Lorna's garden, watered by the spring, began to grow. She planted corn, beans, and squash, the 3 sisters, and a small, precious patch of herbs. They bought a dozen chickens, their cackling a bright, cheerful sound in the mornings. A local rancher, who had despised Coyle and respected Elias's stand, gave them a milk cow as a gift. Elias broke horses for that same rancher to earn money for a proper stove, for glass for the windows, for a new pair of boots for Lorna. He would be gone all day, and Lorna would feel the old, familiar pang of fear. But he always came home. He always rode over the ridge at sunset, and her heart, which had learned to clench at the sound of a horse, now learned to lift. Their new life was built far from cruelty and chains. It was a life of hard, physical work. They were often tired. They were often dirty, but they were never afraid. One evening in the late fall, as the air turned crisp and the cottonwoods in the distant valley went gold, a rider approached their homestead. It was the circuit judge, the same man who had declared Lorna free. He was a stern, upright man named Hatcher. He dismounted, and they offered him coffee. He sat on their new porch, the one Elias had just finished, and looked out at the vast purple sunset. "You've done good work here," he said, nodding his approval. "A fine, solid home." "It's a start," Elias said, his hands wrapped around his mug. "I am on my way to Silver City." The judge said, "But I make it a habit to stop where I see progress, and where I see a need for the law." He looked at them, his eyes, which had been so fierce in the courtroom, now kind. "You 2 are living as man and wife, and in the eyes of God, perhaps you are, but the law is a simpler, coarser thing. It likes paperwork." Lorna felt a sudden, cold prickle. "I offer my services," the judge said. "I can perform a legal marriage, here, now. It would simplify things. Inheritance, property rights. Should anything happen." Elias looked at Lorna. He did not speak. He would not ask her. He would not push her. This was her choice, and hers alone. Lorna looked at the judge. She thought of Coyle and his marriage certificate. She thought of her stepfather and his bill of sale. The law had been a weapon, used against her. She started, her voice small. She looked at Elias. He was watching her, his love a steady, warm light in his eyes. He was not Coyle. He was not Marcus. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "We will be married, but, Judge, I want no ring." The judge raised an eyebrow. "A ring it's a circle, Like a chain, she said, her voice soft. It's a symbol of being bound. I don't want to be bound. I want to be chosen. And, she added, taking a breath, I will not say the vow. The one about obedience. I will not obey him. I will stand with him. I will be his partner. I will love him. But I will not obey. The judge looked at her for a long, hard moment. He looked at her scarred, capable hands. He looked at the quiet, solid man beside her. He smiled, a slow, rare smile. Miss, he said, I think that is the most sensible thing I have heard all year. Equality, a novel concept. I believe the law can make room for it. They were married under the open sky, just as the last sliver of the sun disappeared, in that magical purple light between day and night. Lorna wore a simple dress of blue cotton, the one she had sewn with her own hands. With thread she had bought with her own egg money. She had washed her hair, and it hung, thick and brown, down her back. Elias stood beside her, in a clean shirt. He was pale, and his hands were shaking. The judge read a few words, simple and to the point. He did not speak of obedience. He spoke of partnership, of mutual respect, of building a life together in a hard land. And then it was time for the vows. Lorne's was simple. I will stand with you, I will share the work, and I will love you, every day. Elias, this quiet man, this man of so few words, had written something. He pulled a small, folded piece of paper from his pocket. His hands, which could gentle a wild horse and break a man's jaw, were trembling. He looked at her, his eyes dark with an emotion so profound it almost made her weep. Lorna, he read, his voice low and rough. I have been a wanderer. I have been a prisoner. I never thought I deserved a home. And then I saw you. He looked up from the paper, his eyes finding hers. I will never call you mine, he said, the words a sacred vow, only always, forever. The judge pronounced them man and wife, in the eyes of the law, and Elias kissed her, a kiss that held all the promise of all the sunrises they would ever see. The town of Socorro watched, and the town, which had been so quick to whisper about the bride of debt, slowly, quietly, began to change its mind. They saw her, this woman who had been bought and sold, walking into town with her head held high. They saw her, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She was not a broken, haunted thing. She was a woman who had faced down Coil Atwater, a man who had terrified them all. And she had won. She was Mrs. Elias, some called her, but to Mrs. Finch, and to Judge Miller, and to the shopkeeper who now saved her the best cuts of bacon. She was Lorna, a strong woman, a woman who had, quite literally, rebuilt herself from the ground up. Her healing found its purpose. She remembered her mother. She remembered the blue-covered book of poetry. She remembered her own words to Elias, by the stream of a dream of teaching. She started a school. It was not a formal school. It was 3 girls, the daughters of the blacksmith, who came to her homestead 2 afternoons a week. She taught them on the porch. She had no slate. She drew letters in a pan of clean sand. She had one book, a Bible the judge had given her, and from that one book, she taught them to read. She taught them to see the world beyond the dust of New Mexico. She was giving them the one thing Coil and Marcus had never been able to take from her, her mind, and Elias built. His leg was strong. He broke horses. His work so good, so gentle, that ranchers from 2 counties over brought him their wildest stock. He was not a Scarface hand. He was Elias, the best horseman in the territory. And he built fences. He was good at it. His fences were strong, his posts set deep. He was building a new reputation, one of a man who stayed, a man who protected what was his. Not his property, his life. It was a full year later. The garden was thriving. The house was solid. The school on the porch now had 6 students. It was evening, the air cool and sweet. Lorna was sitting on the porch step, mending one of Elias's shirts, her head leaning back against the post. Elias came and sat beside her. He had been checking the fence line. He was tired, but it was a good, clean-boned tired. He smelled of horse, leather, and the clean sweat of a day's work. He put his arm around her. She leaned her head, not against the post, but onto his shoulder. It was a perfect fit. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset. It was a spectacular, violent sunset, the sky a bleed of orange, red, and a deep, bruised purple. It looked, Lorna thought, like a fresh wound, but it was beautiful. Was it worth it? Elias asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She turned her head, confused. Was what worth it? All of it, he said, his gaze on the horizon. The pain, the running, the fighting, the scars. He touched his own face, the pale line that would always be there. Lorna was quiet. She looked at the sunset. She looked at their small, solid house. She looked at her own hands, mending his shirt, her hands strong and clean. She thought of the line shack. She thought of the cave. She thought of the chain in the barn. She placed her hand over his, the one that rested on her shoulder. "Every bruise," she said, her voice soft, but clear as a bell in the twilight. "Every scar. If it led me here, then yes, this is what forever feels like." Thank you for listening to this story. We would be honored if you'd let us know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment and share your thoughts in English. And do not forget to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one.